To the next one, and it's Monica Hingorani, and she's from the Leicester Aging Together Learning Officer at VISTA, and maybe we're kind of going to be giving a slightly different perspective, because not only are we an increasingly kind of ethnically diverse city, but we're also getting younger as a city, which I guess I kind of feel like I'm personally kind of getting younger as well, maybe longer, but it has implications for when we're ageing in a city that's kind of getting younger, and what that feels like in the way of kind of loneliness and isolating. And I gather those are the kinds of issues that you're dealing with in your organisation.
Yeah, thanks very much for the invitation to come. And I want to really kind of throw it out initially and ask you to talk to the person sitting next to you, because I'm that kind of teacher too, daughter of a teacher, but I like to throw it out to you and just ask you to ask each other really about your idea about ageing and what it means to you, and then we'll have a bit of a discussion about that first. So just turn to the person next to you and talk about what comes to mind when you think about ageing. Wow. I think that's always really like a social experiment, because I think we all carry these very different views about ageing. But I have to say, when we spoke in our group, I'd say the majority of views were about worry and fear and a lack of strength, and frailty were words that I heard. Fear of ill health came up quite often. So I think that's really interesting when we think about ageing, because of course we could have talked about very young children growing older. And perhaps it's because you know I'm here from Leicester Aging Together that actually we're all thinking about ageing as that we've got to look forward to, that silver sunset in our lives. So people were beginning to feel a bit anxious about all of this, and that's not my intention at all, but my intention is to provoke a bit of a debate. So I'm here from Leicester Aging Together, and we are all aging together. It's a £5 million funded 4-year big lottery funded programme, and it's delivered through 17 of us as organisations. I am based at VISTA, which is a sightless charity, and I'm the learning officer, and I've been in post for the whole of 3 months in this final year, so I've got a bit of a challenge, which is to help people document their learning that they have been doing all along, because it's that sort of work, but I've sort of kind of rushed in a bit to help them think about what that might mean on websites and events and products. But I've very luckily worked with the Unit for Diversity, Inclusion and Community Engagement at the University of Leicester previously to this, so helped Ambrose organise this wonderful event this time last year, and I can't believe that's a year. And I think again that's something about perhaps as we grow older, I think we think the years go faster, or they don't. That's physics, or something, maths, I don't know. I was a primary school teacher. But anyway, that was really interesting that you engaged in that process with me. We are about social isolation and loneliness, and we're about opportunities for people 50 plus, that is actually me, I fall into that category, around getting out, meeting new people and trying something new. Because we know the public health messages about loneliness and social isolation. I think we've all become quite tuned into the risk of the equivalent of smoking a packet of cigarettes a day of living a lonely existence, really, and we are social beings. So Leicester Aging Together is about addressing stereotypes of ageing, but also delivering direct services to people who do find themselves, for reasons that are complex and myriad, socially isolated. And I think what often speaks to people most clearly is the experiences of people in those situations. So in a little while I'll tell you about me and other things that I've done in my life that make me think actually it's people who've experienced things, who have lived experience, that can often tell you the best ways through situations. But let me speak to you about one particular case study of someone who's been helped through the services of Leicester Aging Together. He said, "My doctor was worried about me being in the home too much and not getting a lot of contact, so he put me on a course with Open Mind." And then this person said, following this, I came into contact with community connectors. So currently we actually only employ 2.5 community connectors. Leicester Aging Together is a pilot programme. We only operate in 5 wards of Leicester. Remember, there are 21 wards. Suddenly when you join political parties, wards become significant to you. You know, they're like just administrative boundaries. So they're little chunks of neighbourhoods. So it's a very small scale programme, but it is test and learn. So it's not about saying everything is right that you do, which I think often those of us who work in the third sector or charities businesses are often encouraged to say that everything we do is fantastic, when actually we know these issues are complex. So it's not always about saying we've got this right, but it's about saying, what if we imagined this? What if we imagined this world where older people were valued or connected, or do you remember community development and how fantastic that was when it was funded, or you know, when people felt they could create social movements? It's about saying, what can we learn from that? So this guy who I'm calling Steve, who we heard was very lonely, came into contact with community connectors at something called a pop-up cafe. Well, on Thurnby Lodge there's not much around. I don't know how well you know it, but there aren't little cafes there. Jane's nodding, so Jane knows a bit. Sometimes it can be a bit of a kind of desert really when it comes to places for people to meet. So the connectors go out into cul-de-sacs. They were doing some work in the summer. Do you remember the summer that was long and glorious and hot? Well, they put up little canopies and had pop-up cafes. So low cost, no cost. People would come out with their cups of tea and just get together. People in the cul-de-sac who would generally ignore each other, rush past each other, not have the time of day to stop and chat, used to come and sit in a little pop-up cafe that they'd make for themselves. Well, Steve got engaged with that, and he said, things that are good inside your head that you've used in the past start to wake up. So what he's describing is sort of coming through a period of depression that had really isolated him from all the people around him. So, you know, there were neighbours, but he wasn't connecting with them. But he was beginning to recognise that he did have good things going on in his head, but if he started to have the conversations, they'd wake up. So he's talking about his confidence coming back. When I came to the group, I'm asleep, because I've been asleep for 4 or 5 years. And it doesn't happen overnight, because the scaredness in that person's body is still there. So after a few weeks, he said, the seeds in that person start to spring open. And I think, you know, just in that kind of quite poetic description, he's expressing a huge amount of how parts of himself had become dormant and wintry, and actually he's feeling this sort of spring bursting open. And there's scope then, isn't there, to do something hopeful, I think, in his life. But these are very few posts, and the idea is to work with people like Leicester City Council. I was saying to Chaz actually that we went to the Leicester City's Forum for Older People yesterday, and it was really fascinating for me because I came to Leicester to study geography initially, and then I went off to study sociology because those books had been kept hidden from me at school, and suddenly I was reading stuff that was really exciting. It's about our communities. I was with students like me, and it's, you know, it's about a community often. I've got friends from all around the world, as we were saying, the students. We're very lucky, aren't we, to make friends from all around the world. But sometimes you're kind of taking refuge. I went to a very white grammar school and was incredibly academically shy, but probably saw my achievement through that. And I was laughing with John because I was saying I do the park run now. I was probably the most passive child. You know, I dared to exercise because I had taught myself that I couldn't run any distance, and it's only Couch to Buy a Cave that's opened up this world for me. And interestingly for me, I feel more fit at 52. And that's because there are really fit 60 and 70-year-olds at my gym, and I'm like running to catch these women on their runs around the park. So, you know, the stuff about ageing is often stuff we've given ourselves. Well, anyway, at this Older People's Forum yesterday, it was really lovely because people were talking about what a hassle A-boards are along pavements, and there are probably loads along Narborough Road. But it reminded me that the first time I went to committee meetings like that, I was actually employed by Leicester City Council to be their Women's Equality Officer, and a lot of the work that I did in equality and diversity then was around planning, street furniture, street lighting, you know, very sort of reclaim the night and reclaim the streets type work. And I think why sociology was important for me was it was this sense that this is systemic. Planning issues are systemic. They're not accidental. And when we talk about opening up opportunities, actually we benefit not just older people, not just women in pushchairs, not just people who need clear access because of mobility impairments or sight impairments. So actually, sometimes the coming together and the sharing experiences, as those older people would do, forum would benefit us all. And I think that's what I've always felt really about diversity, that it is our human right, and it's, you know, it's not even worrying whether we sit mostly with women, if that's what we choose to do. It's actually part of that collective struggle. And that sort of leads me on, because I know there's not very long, to tell you about a really lovely learning event that's coming up through Leicester Aging Together. And many of you may have heard of Amrit Wilson. Well, when we talk about role models, I don't know, has anyone come across Amrit Wilson? Really important. Have you, Camille? So really important writer for me. She published Finding a Voice in 1978, so that's 40 years old already. Gosh, how we age. But I was actually only 12 then, so. But my mum got this out of the library, and I kind of didn't really pay much attention to it, but sort of read the title. It was only when I came to Leicester and studied sociology and did modules on, I think it was equality and diversity in the labour market, that I read Amrit Wilson's seminal work. And it's really fantastic because she's put an extra chapter in that talks about the experiences of young women reading this and having a conversation with it. And a couple of the women I'd say, but one woman in particular, Kajal Nisha Patel, has had links with the University of Leicester, but it's doing Leicester-born colleges research, you know, they have research talks every month. So she's, I think next week, go and check her out if you can, Kajal Nisha Patel. But Amrit's coming to our talk at Highfield Centre on the 23rd of January. And when you see her on stage, she's this amazing, white-haired, wise woman who went and interviewed South Asian women at a time where people had this either anthropological notion of let's go and study black communities, all the kids are naughty, all the African Caribbean kids are naughty, and all the Asian kids, you know, would only be brilliant if they would just speak English more clearly, you know. Really, really awful cultural stereotypes, actually, that we grew up with. So maybe that's also explaining why we seek refuge sometimes. Remembering that my mother was a teacher as well, and came and worked initially in a factory. And so, until she got her teacher number, and then she worked in schools for 30 years. So we've got lots to share, I think, in this room. But Amrit's really interesting because when you look at the book and you look at the photos in the back, they're South Asian women taking political action. When you think of the Imperial Typewriter strike in Leicester in 1974, There are people doing research, as we know, on those voices and not losing that history. So, the point about that is that actually, when you start from a human rights perspective, you think, actually, yes, older people have a voice and they have a right. And somehow it connects us all. You know, and when we listen to voices like Umrit's, she's saying she found it initially very hard to do her research. She had this blank sheet that, you know, lots of us get anxious about when we're writing things. It was only when she heard the stories that the women were saying to her, no, you need to write my story and get it out there. And I think similarly, by reading you Steve's story and actually listening to it, we can begin to pull together some of the systemic issues around diversity, inclusion and equality. It's not just about individual isolated voices, it's about collective action. So Umrit went on to set up the first South Asian Women's Refuge, and look how we had in Leicester lots of women's centres that have sadly closed down, most of them. We've got Shama Women's Centre still, but you know, we did have a growth in public services and a recognition in the voluntary sector and the charity sector that we needed to address issues across age. The last thing I'll ask you to do, if that's okay, if I've got a couple of minutes left, is just to tell each other what we could do to make Leicester age-friendly. And that's, if you like, the end where you started at the beginning talking about ageing. What could you do to make Leicester age-friendly? You've got a minute.
Sit on that.
I'd love to have a Wow. Such fantastic classroom skills and paying attention. I love that. So finally, I mean that was brilliant, and we can carry that on, I think, in the conversations. And there were some practical, there were practical things. We do newsletters that we give out to the 5 wards, but you can look on the website. I should have said, people were saying, are there things like Restoration Together in other cities? We're one of the 14 programmes that are funded through the Big Lottery Fund, but obviously, you know, there are organisations like ours in other cities. I should have said there are groups of older people who are more at risk from social isolation and loneliness. No surprise, it's Black, Asian, minority ethnic people, LGBT plus people. At Restoration Together, because of where we work and the organisations that are our partners, 66% actually of our participants are from BAME communities. Only 1% identify as LGBT. So we've got some data that shows that Restoration Together has been effective. Other older people at risk are carers and actually those who live on their own. So the guy whose case study I read to you was a single man who lives on his own, who's actually terrified that he'll die alone. And part of the pop-up cafe movement was because there were single people dying in their homes and not being found for a couple of weeks. And so, you know, people were saying, how can I help my grandparent? We're often saying things like, literally, go and knock for your neighbours. Now the winter's here and you don't see people out and about so much, literally just go and knock on their door. They'd rather you were looking out for them, I think, than thinking that you didn't want to bother them. So, yeah, I'm really grateful for this time to talk about that work, but I think, you know, it's such a web of connection, isn't it? And that we're all interdependent.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you so much. Thank you.